record. And you should get a notification on your end. Okay, so welcome everyone. Before we get started, I figure knowing that it's a small group, we could kind of go around and introduce ourselves. And in particular, let Angie know a little bit about where you are. I'm going to assume most of you have finished your dissertations or very close to them, and kind of overall, like high level, what's your dissertation about? What's your what's your tweet of your dissertation, right? My tweet of my dissertation is solitary confinement reform doesn't work. Great. 200 pages in one singular tweet. So with that, I will ask Amanda to introduce themselves and go from there.
Yeah. Hi, so I'm Amanda. So I recently graduated, or I recently defended August 31st from Rutgers. Thank you. So my tweet is civilian oversight also doesn't work. And so what I'm hoping to get out of this is, so I just finished, I don't necessarily want to go back into academia right now. But I don't want to close the door on it officially. So I'm just wondering, should I publish journal articles or would it make sense to write a book? What's the best way to keep the door open while I work a full-time job?
Excellent.
Great. And Amanda, do you want to kick it off to someone else?
Sure. Tamika Williams.
Hey everyone, I'm Tamika Williams. I'm a team member at JSP. Thank you, Shannon, for the invite. I finished my dissertation last May and graduated walked December of last year. So super excited to have completed that goal. So in a quick tweet, my dissertation was about the benefits of leadership development program for public safety officers. And so my goal is to take that large document and build out a few manuscripts to publish. So awesome. I'm excited to learn from you all and get some good information.
Tamika, do you want to kick it off to someone next?
Sure, I'm sorry. Emily.
Hi. So I'm Emily. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Criminology, Law, and Society. I have not yet defended my dissertation. That will be this coming spring. So I don't have an official tweet yet.
But you have a pre-tweet. What's a pre-tweet? Give us a teaser.
I am studying the linguistic analysis of school shooters leakage. So their communication to a third party of the intent to cause harm. And that could be my tweet.
Awesome.
So, and we'll see what I find. To be continued.
Got it. That's the second part of the tweet.
Great.
And then
would you like to go next?
Over?
Angie?
Oh, I'll wait and go last. Let's get all the rest of y'all in.
How about Sierra?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So I'm Sierra Nelson, and I'm a PhD student in the sociology department at Mississippi State University. I'm still kind of in the middle of dissertation things. I haven't defended my dissertation yet, but essentially it will be focusing on the organization, or it is focusing on the organization of right-wing extremist hate groups online, and kind of looking at if they're how organized or disorganized they are, as well as kind of looking at like threat risk factors and kind of things like that. And so my tweet would, I think that would be, I don't have like a full tweet, but essentially looking at how those groups are organizing online or how disorganized they are, which is my expectation.
Awesome. Good. The less well organized they are, the better, I think. That's probably a good thing.
Yes, because just my understanding of like gangs and things, it was like people assume this high level of organization, but so I'm kind of in the middle, because I rolled into my PhD program from my master's at the same institution. So I'd taken all of my classes and had done all of that. And then when I rolled in, it was like, okay, now we just have to get you ready for the prelim. I've taken the prelim. but I've also been working on my dissertation a little bit at the same time. So I'll know if I
Awesome.
pass my prelim next week, and then I will, yeah, I'll know if yeah. And then I will have to go really hard to get like it's kind of like just the first part to my major professor before the end of the year. So I'm kind of like doing everything in just a weird order.
Yeah, makes sense to me. As long as you get to the finish line, right?
This is true. This is true. But yes, I think that I hit all the talking points.
I think
Awesome.
so. And then we'll kick it to Alexis to introduce themselves.
Hi. So I missed the beginning, but if I'm understood this correctly, I have to say like a tweet about my dissertation, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a PhD candidate, and I'm in the middle of analysis right now, so it's not done, but I should be done by next summer. So I guess I would say I study leisure in women's prison, what there is and what it does within the context of the institution. And specifically, I look at gendered and racialized social control through leisure in prison.
Leisure. What's an example of leisure?
Anything that you can do in prison, basically.
Okay. Cool.
Cool. Yeah, that is really cool. I'm gonna let Angie kind of take it from here.
What about Kay?
Say it again. Oh,
Kay?
Kate. Kate's good.
No. Okay.
She's like,
I'm Kate Company. I'm one of I work with Shannon on this series. I'm just
got it.
Share your wisdom and to have some time with everybody in the AltAc.
Okay, got it. Cool. I just wanted to make
Nice
sure.
to see everybody though.
so I'm gonna let kind of Angie run the conversation, but for everyone, you know, we want to spend some time thinking, okay, now that you have a dissertation or you almost have a dissertation or you're just thinking about the future, you're kind of being proactive. Look at you. What does this mean for you? So how do you decide what to kick to academic articles, to Amanda's point, versus what do you decide to write a book about? If you decide to write a book, what does that process look like? How do you find publishers? How do you tell them your story? How do you, maybe it's even before that, how do you find the story in your dissertation worth being in the book or having a book? What does that process look like? How do you convince publishers it's for you? What are the nitty-gritty details? I've invited Angie, my colleague and dear friend Angie, to have this conversation because she has published, I thought at one point it was 4, and then I Googled her, and it was 11, and I texted her like, Jesus, it's 11 books.
Yeah.
So she's written 11 books, including her most recent book, Way Down in the Hole, which reflects on kind of racialized interactions between folks who are incarcerated in solitary and folks who work in solitary. And so that was off of the work that we did together. So really excited for that book to come out. But she's the expert. I feel like she understands the publishing process and kind of what folks are looking for. And importantly, she's published with multiple publishers. So there are pros and cons of big versus small, different universities, and a different understanding of what kinds of stories different publishers are looking for. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Angie to kind of like take it from here.
Yeah, well, thank you, Shannon. It's super fun. I've been really excited about this conversation because for me, this is like where this is the creative part. Like you've done the science, you've done the rigor, you've done all of this stuff to demonstrate that you can, conduct original research and that you can find something that hopefully you're still excited about, or you aren't excited at the moment, but you'll get back excited when you let it rest for a little bit. But I think I want it to be a dialogue. And part of it is that it's a set of questions that I think you need to ask yourself or yourselves. One question would be like, what are my goals? What do I want to accomplish? And when I say that, I mean that, so I'm going to think about a series of buckets. One is, what do I want to accomplish? I'll put the buckets out. 2, who's my audience? And 3, what's the story? And 4, what's the most appropriate medium for the story? So thinking about those 4 buckets, and then we can get into, like really like back and forth and get into some of the nitty gritty. What's my goal? If your goal is a tenure track, tenure line position, and you hope to be successful in that, which, any of us that goes into that, we would want to be successful. You have to talk to other scholars and you have to establish your reputation as a scholar, right? And although there's articles and books are ways to do that. In my experience, articles are somewhat more held to a high, they're somewhat more well regarded. I don't believe that that's actually should be the case, but because I think a lot of people think like, oh, writing a book is easy. Writing a book is not easy. Writing a book is really, really, really hard. But there's this sense that it's also not the case that it's not peer reviewed. So let's just also set that aside. But I think there's this sense that articles are somehow more scholarly. And unless you have a book that really like gets a ton of publicity, and even if it does, it's no guarantee, you're going to have at least an article or 2. So if your goal, and I think Amanda, you said you're thinking that still might be something you want to keep on the, you're not sure, but you might. I think you have to have at least 1 article. Because first of all, they're quicker, as slow as articles are, they're actually much quicker than books. Books take a lot longer. And so it's a quicker turnaround. It won't take as long because it's much shorter, obviously. But I don't think you have to have 10 articles, right? I think if you have 1 article or 2 articles, you can establish yourself as somebody who knows how to write an article. Yeah, sometimes exactly, as Shannon says. And there's just, it also depends on where you want to be. Do you want to be at an R1? Are you interested in liberal arts? Are you interested in sort of R2? Like where is it you want to land? And how are those places going to evaluate work differently? I will say this. The things that I've written that have the most citations are articles. With the exception of 1 book, and it's the book that came out of my dissertation. My articles get cited more. I think it's because it's quicker to do that, right? It's quicker to do a quick JSTOR search, some articles come up, you get, you cite them, and so your citation counts can, I think, ramp up a little bit more quickly. So the first question is what's your goal? If your goal is not necessarily to speak to other scholars, then I think articles are less important. If your goal is to enter, and you can have multiple goals at the same time, but I think if your goal is to enter a conversation, regular people are more likely to pick up a book than an article, right? They're not going to go to ASR. They're not going to go to Punishment in Society. They are going to go to Barnes and Noble, right? And so it depends partly on who you want to speak to. And you can speak to, if you look at across my vita, I speak to different audiences. Sometimes I write for my colleagues who are other scholars. Sometimes I write for sort of what you would describe as more of the general public. And so it's okay to have multiple audiences. It's partly a question of figuring out which audiences do you want to speak to. So that's sort of the second bucket. The third bucket, I think, is, I'm going to rearrange the buckets and we can come back and talk about all of them. But another bucket is, why would you want to write a book? What would be your motivation? And for me, most of the time, and again, most of my books have served multiple purposes, but most of the time it's because I think I have something to say that other people haven't necessarily said, and that can engage a conversation. So I'm interested in entering a dialogue and using a book as a way to enter a dialogue, right? Different from a journal article where you're going to get that conversation is largely, and you know it because you've all written lit reviews to write a dissertation. The argument you engage in or the conversation you engage in with an article is going to happen in primarily in print, right? So you put an article out and people agree or disagree with it, and they write about that in their own work, like, oh, that's so-and-so is totally, completely wrong-headed about that thing, right? And here's the right thing. If you're more interested in engaging people who are not reading academic articles, then books can be a vehicle to do that, right? And the fourth, I guess the fourth is largely, and this would be your methods question. It's a little bit like, do I do quant or do I do qual? Do I write a book or write an article? It depends on what you have to say. How is your data organized? What's the story? Is the story a 30-page article that begins with a an introduction, a lit review, some methods, some findings, and a discussion? Or is the story longer, more complicated, less linear, perhaps? And so what story do you have, which, and multiple stories can be told different ways, right? Most of the, I guess, all of the books that I've written, what is consistent across all of them is they're stories about people. They're not stories about numbers, although some of them have numbers in them. They're not stories about assessment. They're not stories about evaluation or, does a policy work or not. They're stories about people. And so do you have a story? And you can't tell a people story in an article because people don't fit neatly into an article. And usually you have more than one person whose story you're trying to tell. But what brings me to the books is always that I have been moved by people who, for whatever reason, don't have a platform to tell their own story. And I believe passionately that their story needs to be heard. And a book can provide an opportunity can create a platform for people's voices to be heard. I should have started by saying your dissertation is something you write for 5 people and no one else cares about it afterwards. No one besides those 5 people gives a rat's, about it. That is a formulaic, you wrote it to meet a requirement. So now you get the freedom to release yourself and say, how do I want to tell the story? And what's the story that I want to tell? And my goal, by the way, by the end of this is to get Shannon convinced that she's going to write a book because she has a story about people. You have a story about people, Shannon. So I'll stop there. Like, those are some of the questions that I think help guide, even if you want to do it and why you would want to do it. So let's hear what your thoughts are.
I think one thing that comes up for me as you're talking is a couple things, right? That books are seen as less prestigious or less rigorous, in part because they don't get into the nitty-gritty of the methods, although you can certainly do that by adding a methodological appendix, which a lot of folks do.
Yep.
I think that's kind of where this perceived not as prestigious comes from, and why, particularly in R1 traditional criminology focused departments, why there's this 3:1 ratio where one book equals 3 lower level impact journal articles. Is this perceived rigor, which in and of itself, we won't go down a rabbit hole of the conversation about, the westernization of rigor, right? But
right.
About that. So one of the things that comes up for me is to ask myself and to ask each of you yourselves, does the book require, or does the story require someone to understand the finer details of the methods to get the punchline? And if the answer is no, then it feels like maybe the book is where you get to tell that story. If the answer is yes, then maybe that's where you take it to an article. And that's not to say that you can't do both. Right. It's just that whatever that storyline is that requires in-depth methodological understanding to get the bottom line, maybe that needs to be the article that gets carved out, and that's the article where something that can be a conversation that you have over drinks, or, you know, at the coffee table, or, you know, walking down the street, that conversation is the book conversation.
Or think about an undergraduate class. We don't assign ASR articles in undergraduate classes. We barely assign them to master's students, right? But when I think about teaching intro to social or intro to crim, I mean, what did y'all study? Like, I was moved by Arlie Hochschild. I was moved by you know, Matthew Desmond. I was moved by, well, I mean, he came way after I was in school, but there's a reason for that, and Shannon's pointing that out, right? Like, the average journal article gets read by 9 people. Books hopefully by a few more than that, and that's not to say I have written both, right? Like, and because they have a different purpose, right? To Shannon's point.
So thinking about that for folks in the room, and hi, welcome, Kelsey. For folks in the room, do you feel as though, thinking about where you are or where you hope to be or what's in your brain, do you have a sense of like what you feel like could be partitioned out one way over the other?
I think for my dissertation, because I did an ex post facto study and I looked at the perceptions of these leaders post the intervention, that probably an article would be the best approach initially, just because there's such a dearth of literature when it comes to how we train leaders in community-based corrections, right? And so I want to kind of get some stuff out. Okay, like what worked, what didn't work, you know, not utilizing a theoretical frame when building these type of leadership interventions, how that impacts the overall outcomes for these leaders. And so in hindsight, so my PhD is in leadership studies with a focus in higher ed and community colleges. And so, but my undergraduate work and my master's work is in criminal justice. And I worked in the Department of Criminal Justice at North Carolina Central University for 7.5 years and taught in the field of criminal justice. And I've worked, like I spent my career 10 years in community-based corrections, right? So when I decided to go get a PhD in leadership, it was very intentional, because I looked at the, you know, the issues intertwined in our organizational structures and how leaders truly impact the outcomes for the people we want to serve, right, and do the work for. And so I want to add to that body of knowledge, but then at the same time, because there's not a lot out there, I think a book could be beneficial, right, for guidance for practitioners. So honestly, I feel like I could go either way.
What about both ways? What about going both ways?
I would agree. And I have people. There's a part of me, I did a quantitative study, you know, I used Dr. Alice Black from the Ohio State University. I used her instrument and stuff to collect my data, but I have a lot of rich, like, open-ended question responses. So I can kind of do this semi-mixed methods kind of approach to my study and pull out those experiences and really, you know, how they felt they benefited from the program overall and tell that story to a certain degree using those open-ended questions. But then I also had people that volunteered that they would want to be interviewed, you know, after the fact as well. So I still have that ability, because I believe the lived experience, like telling it from their perspective, would be really beneficial from a book standpoint. And then kind of using the descriptive and just the kind of surface high level outcomes for a journal article to just kind of get something out there ahead of time.
Yep, I agree. And I think I should have said this, and you know it probably intuitively, but as we get more and more into the weeds, there's also different kinds of books, right? Like, I've written scholarly books that, you know, that have in-text citations through the whole thing. And then I've written more coffee table books, right? Or books that are assigned in classes, or books that are, you know, read more by, and they have no in-text citations, because that just trips people up, right? So it sounds like possibly what you have is an idea for a book, Tamika, that wouldn't be an academic book. It could be a practitioner focused book, right? Here's the nuts and the bolts. here's the background, but you don't need to read all the citations. I'm just going to tell you, this is what it looks like. These are some of the problems. These are some solutions.
Right, I agree. And then at JSP, one of my projects is I'm running the National Institute of Corrections Executive Leadership Training. So where Shannon has been very helpful with, building some of the assessments. So we're collecting a lot of rich data there. So I feel like that could be kind of another part of the story, because now we have pre-post data, 3 different site locations that could kind of help tell a broader story.
Yep.
So either way, I'm eager to write and get something out.
Good.
That's helpful. Just, your words of wisdom has just helped me kind of parse through, like, okay, now maybe I can do a practitioner kind of book and write my article at the same time.
Totally can.
Tamika, your story and your data reminds me, I don't know if anyone, my mom had to read this when she worked at Disney. She had to read the book Who Moved My Cheese, right?
Yeah.
And, or just like, there's a book that sits in the back seat of my friend's car that she has to read for work. It's a leadership book. I think it's written by like the CEO of McDonald's or something.
Yeah.
I could see a world where you end up producing a book that is more of a book that gets, maybe I don't pick it up, and maybe my mother doesn't pick up the book, but it gets assigned to leaders in corrections, community corrections, right? There's a market for that.
Right.
Absolutely.
So thinking about that, Angie, let's say, so like, take us on the journey of like, we think we have an idea. Let's all agree that we're going to write a book, even though we might not, not, maybe not, probably not. But let's say we do. We have this idea. Angie, take us on the journey of where do we go? I have this idea. I finished it. I've written 300 pages. Solitary confinement doesn't work. Or reform doesn't work. Where do we go from here? How do we start the process of pitching a book?
A book. Yeah, great. Everybody wants, there's two avenues. So again, more buckets. But the bottom line is everyone wants a proposal, and a proposal is about 12 to 15 pages. It's really not a heavy lift. And the proposal isn't a dissertation proposal. They don't really want to hear, here's the literature, here's how my book fits into the larger scholarly argument. They just want to hear a little bit about what's the story of the book. What are you going to tell in the book? Often a chapter outline, but it really can just be like, I think chapter 1 will be about, this, and chapter 2 will be about that, to give them a sense of the book. And then it's really all about trying to convince them that there's a market for the book, because unlike journal articles, book publishers need to sell books. And if they don't sell books, they don't make money, right? They lose money on you. And so they want to know, what books is this book going to compete with? They want to know what kinds of classes could the book be assigned in. Weirdly, of all of the books that I've written, the one that has the highest rank on Amazon is a textbook. And I know it's because it gets picked up in classes, and it's a really unique, the title of it is The Social Dynamics of Family Violence. And it's a book about family violence written through a sociological lens, as opposed to a psychological or mental health or social work lens. And it's one of the only ones on the market. And so sociologists who are teaching classes on family and some sort of family violence, they assign that book. And that book, I mean, it's a textbook, like that's a good book. It's not that interesting. No one's going to just pick it up and read it. But if you can convince them that there's a market for the book, like a training program or an academy program, or this would be great in, CRIM 110 or whatever, that's what they want to see. You're pitching a product to them. I can give you examples of proposals, but it's really 12 to 15 pages. Like it's not a major heavy lift. How do you think about what kind of publishers to go to? As you probably know, because you've done tons of research in the literature, publishers have niches, right? And so one of the things I've always done is look to see who's published the books of the people I'm reading and citing, right? And so if you're looking in, for example, Solitary or some of the Crim J stuff, you're going to see Stanford comes up a fair amount. University of California Press comes up a fair amount. But when you go through your literature review, like who is publishing books in the areas that you think your book is in? Also, do you know anybody that's published with a particular publishing house? Call them up, send them an email and say, hey, would you mind, I think I have an idea for a book. Would you introduce me to your editor? People do that all the time. I make referrals to the people I've worked with all the time, and people have done the same for me. I'll introduce you to the editor. Make appointments at conferences. The acquisitions editors are always in the book booth at the conferences. Walk around, pick up books. What books look interesting to you? Make an appointment with an acquisitions editor. It's that kind of networking that's completely different than, nothing is really blind. I mean, the reviews are supposedly blind, but it's not a blind process in the way that journal articles are. So it's all about, look to see where you think you might be a fit. Think carefully about what you think your book is about. So as Shannon mentioned, Way Down in the Hole is about solitary confinement, but it's also about race. And so I asked my friends who write in the sort of literature about white supremacy and white racial resentment, who did you work with? Who are your publishers? So your book might be about more than one thing, right? Then there's the whole, if you want to write a book that's going to sell a lot of copies and be like the most accessible, then you want to write a trade book. And to write a trade book, you need to get an agent. And the biggest mistake that I have made in my professional career is not getting an agent for Way Down in the Hole, because I think it could have gotten a decent trade contract. I think it could have come out with, St. Martin's, or it could have, I'm going to read the chat in a sec. It could have come out with and here's the difference. Trade books have much more robust marketing departments, because they usually will give you a bigger advance and they have to make that money back. And so if you can get an agent to like your idea, then they broker the contract. They broker the terms and you get much better marketing. So it's also like, do you think your book is strictly an academic book, or do you think your book is a Matthew Desmond book? Is it a Arlie Hochschild book? Is it a Jonathan Metzl book? If it's that kind of a book, then you absolutely should get an agent. And you might want to get an agent anyway, because they can usually get you better terms. That's my biggest professional mistake, which I love to share.
One of the other things that strikes me about, so I like the idea of, certainly going to conferences, picking up books. What are books, if you're looking at Stanford Press or Rutgers Press or Oxford, what are they primarily publishing on, to get a sense? I like your idea of asking scholars, hey, you work in race and white supremacy or white resentment. Well, that's going to require a very specific editor to really understand that and not push back on the things and effectively sanitize the book, right? Because that's not the purpose of it.
Right.
So I think that's important. I think there's also some pros and cons, right, about going to certain publishers over others, in my experience, right? So you have the Cambridge Press, the Oxford Press, those types of books certainly those publishers have a lot of prestige, but they might be a bit more cookie cutter, or might be a bit different in the way that they interact with you versus a lesser known publishing house or a smaller publishing house. Can you speak, Angie, to a little bit about how those dynamics work, or what a smaller publisher house might do in terms of writing blogs for you?
Yep.
Doing the legwork of getting your words out there, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, these days, most publishing houses, unless they're one of the big, like really big trade houses, they've gutted their marketing departments. And so mostly they don't help you at all much with marketing. In fact, we just hired a publicist and it's really expensive to try to do some of that. But a smaller house, and these are some of the lessons learned along the way. I've written a bunch of books with Rowman and Littlefield. Rowman and Littlefield is not a huge press, and it's sort of in that space between trade and academic. They're accessible. So if you find out that, I don't know, a book club in Austin, Texas wants to read your book, and they want to do it in 2 weeks and they need copies of the book at a discounted rate, you are literally you can talk to the president of the company and be like, yo, John, I need books. And John will happily, ship the books to where you need them to be. If you're at the bigger houses, you're going to be passed among a lot of different people, and sometimes figuring out who you even need to ask for the thing you need is going to be more complicated. And Shannon's right, like Oxford, Cambridge, their books have more prestige. Their market is libraries. Their market is to sell books to libraries. And so they don't care at all about, in my opinion, they don't care at all about what the book looks like. Does it have an intriguing cover? I mean, do you want to pick it up? Or is the book that you're like, yeah, I'm gonna pass right by that because that looks like super boring. How much do you care about that? I think I'll stop my video. This is the cover of Way Down in the Hole. I love this cover. I'm not sure I could have gotten that cover at Oxford. I mean, that was a big negotiation, and also learn if you're, the big difference between books and articles is in the book world, you actually have a lot more power to negotiate. You can say, I don't like that cover. I'm going to change the chapter order. Sometimes get to pick the font. I don't like the font. I'm not going to do endnotes. I want to do whatever, right? Like you can push back if you believe that your book will be more successful in a particular fashion. I feel like I've said a lot. I intend to attempt the trade book route. Oh, how does one get an agent? Ask same way you get an acquisitions editor. You ask people who have an agent and you just work your way through people who have agents. You can cold call them, but I've had no luck doing that. We're working with actually, we just got news today that we got we have one offer to do an audiobook for Way Down in the Hole. And it took an agent to get that. So I can recommend that person. I can certainly reach out into my networks, and I got that person from a friend of mine who has an audio, she has a book, but she also has an audiobook. And I was like, how'd you get the audiobook, Deb? And she was like, here's the agent's name. And I was like, great. So it's all about networks, right?
One of the questions that Kate asked, is that some departments are maintaining the standalone dissertation versus the 3 article route.
Yep.
And kind of in light of this, what would you recommend? I think having just finished a 3 article dissertation and been a part of writing a book,
yeah,
I don't think that the 2 are mutually exclusive. I think that if you are really interested in staying in an R1 and a tenure track, actually, let me go back. I think that doing the 3 article approach is the easiest in the long run for both folks who want to be tenure track, R1, or even in any school, really. I don't think it even has to be an R1. I think all schools want publishing, and it just makes the process easier to write a 3 article dissertation. And if you're in an AltAc space like me, it makes it easier to pump things out while you're working full time, where you don't have the elbow room to think about publishing.
Yep.
So I think regardless, the 3, if you're going into a traditional academic space, even in a teaching college or a AltAc space, I think the 3 standalone is still a really thoughtful option in the long run. I still think that that doesn't mean that you can't still write a book, right? Like, I still think that there's a story there.
Absolutely.
That can happen pending that you're just good at synthesizing the 3 stories overall, right? That you might have to spend some more time with yourself thinking about, I answered a research question per paper, but really, how do these all hang together in a really thoughtful, meaningful way? If you do the 3 chapter or 3 article approach, you might have to spend more time with yourself synthesizing later.
And I guess I would say, I'll tell you the story of my first book. And this is true no matter what kind of dissertation you write or wrote or hope to write or will complete this year. I thought oh, I'll just send my dissertation manuscript off to book publishers, right? No more can you send a dissertation off to a book publisher than you can send just a chapter from Shannon's dissertation straight over to ASR. Like, it doesn't, no matter what you wrote, it has to be rewritten. And so it's just a question of how much work at one time and in what buckets. But yeah, so I sent it off and wondered, this was the old days where you went to the library and you went through these like reference books to find acquisitions editors and their mailing address. And it took me forever because there was no Google in these days. So you have to, like, I'm old, right? There was no Google. Keep that in mind. Everything said, send this, and SASE. Self-addressed stamped envelope. I didn't know what the F and SASE was, right? So I asked around, what's an SASE? And people were like, oh, self-addressed stamped envelope. So you sent them a self-addressed stamped envelope on the hope and prayer that they would send you anything, including a rejection. And mostly they didn't send anything at all, right? So no matter what you wrote, you are going to have to rewrite it, right? That's just the reality. And your dissertation chairs probably hardly ever tell you the honest truth. You have to rewrite it. And so, but I agree with Shannon. Like, I think, books don't always even necessarily set out to answer a really specific research question. They can set out to tell a story that is certainly a research question and certainly, data around that, but they're just written. Like, I already know what Shannon could write in her book. Like, I see the book, but I know, Shannon, you don't see the book, but you're going to have to rewrite no matter what you publish. So here's another way. My first book got published because I entered a book contest, right? So, and someone has in here society. So the National, oh my gosh, now it's NCFR, National Council on Family Relations, published a new scholar book award, and along with the book award came a book contract. So I entered I nominated, or someone nominated the book for me. I don't remember. I got nominated for the book award and I got the book award, and so I got a contract. So that's another route to look at getting your dissertation nominated for that kind of a contest.
Thanks for your comments around that, Angie. I know when I was doing my dissertation, which a while ago in 2018 I finished, but I didn't have the option to not do a traditional, and that was other folks in my department did, but my chair was very much like, you will write the 400-page dissertation, it will start with, and then on the second day whoever created whatever, and go all the way through the most recent published piece and whatnot. But I gotta say, even though it was published in 2018, just a couple days ago, I had somebody email me wanting to talk about it. So theoretically, I mean, don't believe what they say. Somebody out there will read your dissertation.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
It might be
right.
somebody who's like a random colleague at Washington State Department of Corrections when I work at Oregon Department of Corrections. So now I have an interesting connection with colleagues that way. So
right. Yeah, no, exactly. It also means that just because you wrote it a while ago doesn't mean it's still not a relevant, interesting topic, right? I mean, books take so long to write that it's not that they're not relevant, but like, you're telling a story that has a little bit more, like, it's not fad and fashion, right? It's a story that has a little bit more often staying power in some ways. Amanda, you had your hand up.
It was an aside question. I wrote a book about I wrote a dissertation, not a book yet, about an organization, and people from the organization contacted me, and they wanted to read it. So I was just wondering, I've just been going back and forth in my head about they said, like, we just want to read your dissertation. Would you send them your dissertation?
Shannon's nodding. Yeah.
I would, yes. And I'll maybe Kate might be the best to answer this as somebody who's embedded in an organization. But I feel like if you did work in an organization and they open the doors for you, that not gatekeeping your own findings is not productive.
Right.
And it's exploitative. right? Like I would, because at that point in time, you really simply weren't there to help make the situation better. And whatever you found is what you found. They don't have any say in what you wrote. But I think to gatekeep your own findings is to me, and this might be a hot take, I don't know, but to me is not why I do science. I do science, particularly applied science, because I want that organization to be better. Why wouldn't I tell them what I found? And if I'm just taking from them for my own benefit to get a PhD, then I am contributing to the exploitation of organizations. I'm contributing to resource extraction, and I'm just not sure that you or I want to contribute to those things.
And my only hesitancy is, do you want to send them the actual dissertation, or do you want to send them the parts of it that are the most interesting to read? Like, they might not want to read the lit review. They might want to, you know, is there a different packaging of it? But absolutely. And students, you know, ask me this all the time, like, look, I've made a career off telling people stories, right? That's what I paid to do, right? Like I gather stories through research, however that is, and I get jobs and I get a salary and I make a tiny bit of money on books, not a lot because they don't pay a lot, but you make a little bit of money. And so one of the things I do is take a portion of the royalties that I make and I give them back to the kinds of organizations, like just literally a financial donation to the kinds of organizations that address the whatever it is in the book, right? So if the book is about intimate partner violence, I take a portion of those royalties and I give them back to the local shelter, or I give them back to an organization that does that work, for exactly the reasons you said, Shannon, right?
I want to jump in really quickly on this one as well. So I'm the research scientist and research operations manager in a Department of Corrections. We have an external research committee that anybody who either wants to do research in our facilities or with our people, or even use, you know, secondary administrative data, will go through. Our administrative rule actually states that external researchers must provide a copy of deliverables before they're published, and that includes through a thesis defense, the dissertation defense, any of that sort of stuff. And that's, as Shannon and Angie mentioned, that's not to sanitize or hide any findings. It's to make sure language is consistent, and it's to make sure that context is appropriately represented and things of that nature. So that's one thing. Like, at some places they might literally require you to have to return a copy of the deliverable back, and there might be a timeline associated with that. We also have put a plan in place since I got here that instead of just requiring the deliverable, whether it's a journal article or a report or a thesis, I actually like people, the external researchers that we work with, to create a one-pager for our executive team and our staff. Why is this important? What do you want us to know about this? What do you want us to change? Like, we're receptive, and I'm using the proverbial we. The practitioner community is overly receptive to all of that sort of stuff. Third thing, kind of in this area, as you can tell, this gets me really animated. Please don't do that, because our staff feel very burned when they participate in research and don't get anything turned around back to them. Even when my shop is asked to do kind of a performance evaluation, and we want to, or a fidelity evaluation or something of a new program that we're piloting. Even when I talk with COs, program analysts, program leaders, kind of the correctional counselors, those sorts of people, even if I don't circle results back to them, they are knocking on my door saying, hey, you know, I chatted with you about this. I was really hoping that I'd be able to kind of get some collated feedback from everybody that you spoke to. I know what I said, but what did everybody else say? Especially people that work at different facilities. If you're doing any cross-jurisdictional work, maybe blind the names of the facilities, or ask those facilities, jurisdictions, agencies, if you can include their name. If not, you can do facility A, B, C, D and still incorporate a whole bunch of really important information across, you know, whatever you're talking about. I think that's the stuff that I had around that. So again, like I'm embedded in an agency. I do kind of this interesting role where I don't publish that frequently in kind of journal articles or anything like that, but I get a lot of stuff in front of the governor, in front of the legislators, in front of, you know, other practitioners, and I collaborate with other people like you all and in the university setting, outside the university setting and whatnot. So there's so many incredible opportunities, but literally agencies feel burned at times, and like the academic, you know, action research community really needs those partnerships desperately.
Yep.
So it's just really, really great social scientific, people scientific practice to just like really engage with the agencies, both on the front end and the back end of everything.
Yep, I agree 1000%. And I think people are writing about the one pagers. I mean, look, this is, I don't know how y'all find out stuff that you need to know, but I was looking something up the other day. I can't even remember what it was, but where did I find the answer? Prison Policy Initiative, right? They are much better. Places like that, Vera, they're much better. Like copy their one pager. That's what a policymaker is going to read, right? They're not going to, I don't really mean like they won't read your dissertation, but I mean, I think that many academics believe, oh, they'll pick up my whole book and they're going to read it, or they're going to go to the journal and read the whole article. And I think at least in Soc and Crim, as someone put in here, we don't get a voice at that table if we're purely, you know, in like working in higher ed, because we don't write stuff that's accessible to people. We've decided that if anyone can possibly understand it, it's not science, right? It's crazy. It's crazy. But I think your point too, though, is give them what they want. If people want to read the entire research report, then that's what you should give them. If people also want a one pager or sort of a policy summary, then do that, right? You're indebted to them.
And you can even ask them. So I have my research is in prisons. So it was approved by the Department of Corrections in my province, and they want to get the dissertation and publish it on their website. And they also want to make sure that I'll go back and give a conference or whatever, or a few conferences on the topic, just so they know what to do with this knowledge that I dump on their laps, and make sure that it gets across to the practitioners as well, not just whoever has time to read 300 pages, which is not practitioners for sure.
I appreciate that. I think that's right. I know that we are at the top of the hour, so I want to be thoughtful. In the chat function, I put in a document. That document I collated from Dr. Porterwood Stacy. You can follow her on Twitter. She writes a lot about transforming your dissertation into a book. She also has a full website dedicated to kind of this process for students, and has lots of resources like this one. I felt like this one was very appropriate for our discussion today. I felt like she does a really good job of really kind of laying out for you how to go step by step in the process, right? So she says, okay, what are other books that are similar to yours in title, and who published them? So you can start to see, is there a theme of who's publishing these kinds of works? Then she talks about like, what's your target presses? There's a series of questions, right, that you can ask. Does the press actively promote its books and authors? Is that on you to do? Do you have to get your own publisher? So these are kind of questions that you should be asking colleagues to learn more about the publishing house. The step 3 is gathering submission info and summarizing your book's fit. Like Angie said, a lot of times houses will want an an overview of what the chapters are, annotated chapters. Sounds like Angie might be able to share one of hers. I don't know that
Absolutely.
is shareable, but certainly that might be really helpful. Some houses want a first
Chapter.
chapter, that so you need to ask that follow-up question is, do you
Yep.
want a first chapter or not?
Or any chapter. Sometimes
any-
it doesn't have to be the first chapter.
Okay,
right.
any chapter for sure. You'll also have to identify, Angie kind of hinted at this like busting this myth that books aren't peer reviewed. Books are typically peer reviewed,
Yeah.
and you'll have to create a collated list of academics that you think would be a good fit and have the expertise to read your book and be able to offer thoughtful critiques about it. So as you're putting that together, as you're putting that together, think about, who are you citing?
Yeah.
Who do you know? And creating a list for your publisher so they can send it out makes it easier, and typically a requirement in most publishing houses.
And usually you reviewed both the proposal and the full manuscript. So it's going to happen twice.
That's right.
Right.
In there, she also talks about, the why, the like, what, people, places, things, what do you describe? Why does this matter?
Yep.
Who should be reading this book? All the kinds of things that Angie's kind of talked about here. Talking to editors, certainly you can, over coffee. I know when Danielle, Angie, and I wrote the book that the three of us wrote together, Danielle took the acquisitions editor out to
Yep,
coffee and said, I'm thinking about this. And honestly, the editor she just said, I have this idea. What are you thinking? And the editor actually helped her, because it was a smaller house. The editor actually helped her mold it into something that their house would like.
Yep.
So another benefit of going to a smaller house is they might have more flexibility in helping you work through the process, as opposed to you coming with a full idea, right? Other than Angie, no one else has written 11 books in this group where you can like walk in the door and have everything kind of fleshed out. A smaller house might help you work through and flesh it out for you. But step 5 in the document offers that. Collecting a list of comp titles, articulating your book's audience. All of that is in that in the document that I sent over. They have the distilling a one-liner for your book. That's why I started with the tweet. Yep. These are like, this is the way. First off, I know that Sierra's work is on violence and active shooters, because she was able to bring it to me in 140 characters. I know that Amanda's work now, right, is on civilian oversight, and then it doesn't work. An hour later, I can remember that because you gave it to me in one sentence.
Yep.
So thinking about what the sticky headlines are, the document also helps you think about that so you can get the point across quickly. I just think it's a really good resource as you're thinking through how you start this, what kind of questions you need to ask yourself and answer for yourself.
I think one thing you said, Shannon, that's really important about going out to taking the editor out for coffee or whatever, is understanding that one of the big differences, I should have started with this, but one of the big differences between a journal editor and a book editor is a journal editor is functioning as a gatekeeper and hopes to keep almost everyone out. An acquisitions editor at a publishing house actually wants you to be successful, right? They want to get the thing to the place where it is, right? So they're very different conversations, right? So yes, and it's not illegal or unethical or immoral or anything like that. You can send them gifts, like all of that is absolutely okay. Yeah, people got to go. But let me know how I can help. If people want examples of proposals, I'm happy to share those. Introductions to editors, happy to do that. Agents, anything I can do to help.
I would say, Dr. Hattery, so we can reach directly out to you.
Please.
Okay.
Yep,
All right.
absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
All right. Yeah. Have a good day.
Bye, Tamika. Amanda, I know that Amanda originally asked for us to do this, so I want to make sure if you have a few more minutes.
Sure.
Amanda, do you feel satiated, for lack of a better word? Like, is there something that we didn't hit that might be really helpful for you, or kind of what's lingering for you?
Sorry, but the doorbell rang, so my ferocious guard dog decided to go crazy. So now she's trapped in here with me. No, that was great. I really appreciate you guys, taking the time to help me out. It's really weird to defend, because then you're done. And then you're just like, you work on something for, in my case, it was like 18 months, like every day.
Yep.
And then I defended August 31st, and then September 1st, I was like,
What do I
what
do?
the heck do I do? Yeah, what do I
Yep.
do with this? So there was one chapter, and that was why I was thinking books, was because one of my committee members was like, this is really cool. This could make the basis of a book. But the more I think about it, I have the 3 chapters for my findings, and I think that would just lend itself. And I think that it would probably, if I'm working a full-time job, to like put together these articles, it's probably a lot faster. And I mean, I hate to I gotta think about my life and like what I can and can't do. So, but it was really helpful to know like what's going on. I didn't realize the 3-to-1 ratio at all. So like
It's not a hard rule.
no,
Right.
of course. No,
But
of course.
it's general.
Yeah.
Kind of a general.
Yeah. I didn't know that at all, which I think is kind of sucky, because like it seems like books are so much harder to like, I would have thought that they meant more, which is what it is. But
And don't here's the thing too, you're playing a long game. And so just because you decide to publish 3 articles now doesn't mean you'll never write a book about your dissertation or something else,
yes,
right?
totally.
Like you're playing a really long game, and
I think
it doesn't mean you're selling it out, right?
agreed. I think one of the other things that I can imagine, knowing what I think I know, my dissertation has 3 very specific questions that basically said the state of Pennsylvania said they were going to do something. Did they do it? And I look at that in 3 ways. Did they do it this way? Did they do it here? Did they do it here? And the answer I kind of came up with was like, no, not really, and yes-ish, right? That's my whole dissertation in 400 pages or 300 pages boils down to that.
Right.
But each of those in of itself, I could easily get out the door tomorrow.
Mhm.
But I think to your chair's point, or whoever made the commentary to you, there's a portion of chapter 2. It's just a line. And I think this is what Angie's talking about. It's just a line in my dissertation, a small analytic statement that's explaining something in the larger grand scheme of what I'm trying to prove in that one chapter.
Right.
But it basically says something like that, that there is a deep misunderstanding about what mental health is and is not. And that the way that it is manufactured in prison settings, and particularly in solitary setting, looks as though it's malingering when it's really something else. It's just one small little analytic statement. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, is Angie's thinks that is the basis of the book that I would write, which is about how do we really think critically about mental health in prisons, and how do we battle like misconceptions at the intersection of race and gender and geography, because most prisons are in rural settings, right? That all of these things matter. That I think is probably the book, but it's
absolutely
2 sentences in my dissertation.
And it's also because I know Shannon and I know the work. The book also then, I mean, this is the beauty if you do a book, is it opens up things that are way outside your specifics of what's in your dissertation. Shannon went to that training thing that you went to, right? Like you sat with officers who were learning supposedly about how to work in this kind of unit. That's a chapter in the book, right?
That's cool.
Yeah. So I think, that you're right, that it's as somebody, especially in AltAc, where I'm not paid to write all day like Angie is.
Right.
Certainly the 3 chapter getting it out the door makes sense, but maybe the one sentence or the thing that your chair was like, that's really cool. Like that doesn't mean that it can't be the book later.
Yep.
Right. Yeah.
And it's usually the thing or the person that gets under your skin and inside you, and you can't, it's like a sliver you can't get out. And it's like people need to hear this, like other people need to, because it's just,
Yeah. And I think your point about it's a long game is something that I actually forgot about it, because I feel like when you're in when you're in the program, it's like, okay, I gotta get this, gotta do this. And then like, you're kind of like, you're just trucking to get out, and then you're out and you're like, wait, I have to rest. What the hell am I supposed to do now? Like the rest of my life. So that's helpful to know that like, I can do the articles, and then if it's still, that sliver is still in me, I can, pick at it until it festers and forms a wound.
Because usually that's telling you that there's something here that is a story that needs a broader telling, right?
I would also say, I think if I heard you correctly, Amanda, you said that you were also maybe interested in working in industry, not in academia.
Right. Yeah. Yes.
So, I think one thing that I don't think that we talk about enough, right, is what does a book look like in this space? So writing a book on solitary confinement, I don't do any in custody work at my job. However, for my job to say we have a book author on staff is a big deal. My company really enjoys that. Or I have the ability to get in front of different types of audiences in this space, more practitioner audiences. I give much bigger presentations to a wide breadth of audiences, and I get to occasionally, shamelessly plug this book that I wrote. And because it is a book for my neighbor and for my friends and for anyone, I get to tell them about it, and then it's likely that they're going to pick it up. And I will say in this AltAc space, there is space to talk about your book and it to connect with more of your audiences in a more direct way, just simply because you have more opportunities to talk with varied audiences rather than in an R1 or any kind of traditional academic sense. You're kind of typically talking to your students.
Right.
That's so interesting. I'm also working in AltAc at the same time, and it had not occurred to me that that could be an asset. I thought I'd be doing like finish my dissertation, transition to full-time in my current job, and then like evenings and weekends maybe write. But that's a really good point.
I think Shannon's right.
I would also, and this is maybe a conversation for another time, but I always tell people as I'm coaching them into industry spaces, to ask a research nonprofit or a soft money think tank, like, what are the metrics of success here? Right. And then sometimes in a lot of, at least in Alexis, you're in Canada, correct?
Yeah, and it's a government job, so it's not the same.
It's not the same. The metrics don't exactly the metrics. And even here, sometimes in Kate's world, the metrics of writing aren't going to be the same, certainly. But in some spaces, there might be some room for negotiating over this. If I bring in book deals, if I publish while I'm here, if I do this, is there space for me? If I publish a book, is there space for you to help pay for me to take my show on the road? Is there space for this? And all of that stuff can be negotiable in industry spaces. So for example, I am going someplace to talk about our book, Surviving Solitary. And I said to my company, hey, will you pay for me to go to promote this book that's about me? And while I'm there, I'll also present some stuff on JSP stuff, right? Like, okay, great. Sounds good to us. So there's spaces in industry to help effectively cover the costs of what Angie might have to do out of pocket.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think, and maybe this is the sort of thing that you want to just really percolate for a long time. This might be super nerdy, and maybe I'm the only person that views it this way, but there are stories that I can't rest unless they get told. Like, I just can't, like, I cannot stop. And it's always a person or an incident, right? Like something I saw or someone I talked to. That's awesome, Kelsey. Yeah. And if, you write because you can't stop thinking about it, right? Like you can't, like, you find that every moment that you're not doing what you're paid to do, you're thinking about it, then you have a book that needs to be written, right? It's a more creative, in that way, I feel like it's a more creative process. It's like I'm not a musician, I'm not an artist, but I can imagine if you write music, there's lyrics in your head that you just have to get out, right?
Yeah.
That's for me how writing the book feels like. There's a story that just I cannot stop thinking about it.
I feel like that's a good takeaway and a good thing to end on, right? The thing that preoccupies you, that you
Yeah.
constantly keep bringing up over drinks or, with your partners or friends, right?
Yep.
I think that certainly makes sense. That's the story to talk about and tell. With that, I
Yeah.
know we're at 13 minutes over time, so I want to thank Angie for your
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Super
Of
fun.
course. I will, as part of the larger conversation in this recording, it certainly will go up on the DCS website, so you'll have access to it. You'll also have access to Angie's email. I'll send all of that information probably by the end of the week. Once all of that stuff is up there. There's also the document. You should be able to download it from the chat function that I sent out. If you cannot, let me know and I can email it directly to you. Thank you all.
Y'all
for-
doing great work, and congratulations on where you are. It's all very exciting.
Yes, so
Yeah.
I appreciate you all for your engagement and for Angie to come in and share her wealth of knowledge about how this process works.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great chance to promote a book. There's another book you might want to buy for your holiday shopping, right?
And with
See?
that, let us shamelessly plug, as we all do each other.
Yep.
Let me shamelessly plug Angie's book. It is Rutgers Press, right?
Yep.
What is the code again?
I'm looking right now. The
Here
code,
is the book, should you want to order it and get a sense of it. Mine is in the mail, apparently, somewhere along the line. But there is a code.
yep.
If you use, I believe it's if you use
If you order directly, I'll put it in the chat. If you order directly from Rutgers, so you can't order it from Amazon this way, but if you order directly from Rutgers, there's a 30% discount code, and it is RFL R19. There we go. So that can be saved but you have to order it from Rutgers but it's 30% off, and I think it brings it down to like under $20 or something like that.
I feel like the reading books like Way Down in the Hole is a good way to get a sense of what does this look like? How does it feel? What does storytelling look like and feel like?
I hope so. And your book, Shannon, we're going to have another conversation. Apparently the UPS person does not like coming to your apartment. So
my book, My Way Down in the Hole, got lost somewhere in the mail and got sent back. So we're in the process of bringing it back to me.
I was there today and they were like, that's the same address. And I'm like, so Shannon offline will have to figure out if the Postal Service is better or FedEx, but
Fair enough.
It will be there.
Well, thank you all so much.
Thanks you all. Good luck.
Appreciate you all.
Yep.
Thank
ping
you.
me if
Let us know if you have
anything
any
you want.
questions.
I
Yep.
really appreciate this. I'm so thankful. Thank you guys.
Of course.
That was
Bye.
really helpful.
Congratulations, everybody. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.